If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you're a hunter or you just enjoy the great outdoors. If you value your ability to hunt, now is the time to step up. There have been countless efforts to vilify hunters and denounce the legitimacy of the science-based wildlife management model. There's no science to this stance, and it is solely emotionally charged. We don't want to see what happened with the grizzly hunt replay itself again with the remaining large carnivores or big game species. It's a slippery slope, folks. We need to stand together. Now is the time for hunters to be united across all organizations and show our combined support. Please go to wildsheepsociety.com/act now and follow the steps. It doesn't take much time and it will help save the future of hunting. This applies to residents and non-residents alike. Please, let's use our voice and be heard. On with the show, folks. This is episode 18 of the Wilderness Locals podcast. On this episode, we talk with Bill from Iron Will Outfitters. Iron Will is one of the leading manufacturers of broadhead and arrow components on the market today. This podcast is brought to you by Kafaru International, the toughest hunting gear on the planet, bar none. Frontiers Meat Gear, high quality, completely custom, handmade knives made in the heart of the Peace Country. And as always, we're brought to you by Just Shooting Arrows, BC's premier archery shop.
Yeah, we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. That's cool.
Yeah. So I think I should probably start off by saying that we're both Iron Will customers, and I think we're both going to be pretty. I think we're both going to be pretty biased. I mean, I think we've both killed a few animals with your heads. Have you, Ace?
I just shot a bear last year. I think it was with wide 125 with the recurve.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I shot a bear with a wide and been shooting deer with just the regular solid 100. So, yeah, no. And part of what kind of really got me behind Iron Will was last season I was heading out to go see Wasey in Southern Alberta. I'm in BC, and my impact collars got stuck in the COVID abyss at the border, and I sent one email and they're like, "What's your address? We're going to overnight you some." And you guys sent me some collars, so I was good to go the next day.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's your your glowing biased review at the start of this thing. And so basically how we start all of these things is we go, who are you? What do you do? And how did you get started hunting?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So you want me to?
Go for it. Yeah, all right. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Bill Vanderheyden. What I do now is my company's Iron Will Outfitters. We make broadheads and other components. And I got started bow hunting, as a kid. Really, my dad, my grandfather were bow hunters, really avid hunters and fishermen. I grew up in kind of central Wisconsin, and about everybody around there hunted and fished. And so I started shooting a bow pretty young. I started out, shooting a recurve and hunted. You can start deer hunting at age 12 there. So I started deer hunting with the recurve for a couple of years before I could afford a compound, and I've been using pretty much compounds since then. But yeah, was crazy about deer hunting. And then when I was like 29 or so, moved to Colorado, and just got crazy about elk hunting ever since then.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I read that when you first came out west, you struggled for a handful of years there.
I did. Yeah. I was, it was kind of hard to take too, because I felt like I'd gotten pretty good at whitetail hunting. I think I'd shot like 20 deer by the time I was 20 between a rifle and a bow, and you can party hunt there, you can shoot your buddy's deer and stuff like that too. So, yeah. And I got to a point where I could kind of target a big buck and work really hard at it and get him by the end of the year. And so I felt like I was a pretty good bow hunter. And then I moved to Colorado, and man, I knew zero about elk and mule deer too, really. But I just didn't understand the animal and their way they act. And so, yeah, I would do a lot of kind of dumb things I see now. Like I'd get a bull to bugle, if I called and he bugled, I would like think he's going to come all the way in and walk in for a shot or something. You know, I'd just be all excited. And you know, it took quite a few years there to kind of get elk figured out. And, you know, there's a lot to that, but, you know, pretty successful now, but there was quite a few years where I struggled there for sure.
Yeah. I think Wasey saw on Instagram somewhere you had some crazy pack out, right, Wace?
Yeah, that was you, Bill. I think, hey, last year your Colorado bull.
Yeah, I've had some long pack outs the last 2 years. 2 years ago, I was solo when I got my elk in about 5 miles and packed that one out solo. I just took, you know, I took like a day and a half to do it in 3 loads, like 75, 80 pound loads. Mostly downhill though. It wasn't really too bad. I just kind of took my time, had a good Cafaro pack and some trekking poles and take it slow. It's not so bad. Last year I got 2 bulls, just a giant one in Colorado, and it was 11 miles back from the trailhead. Oof. And 4 miles was national forest. So we were able to take a 4-wheeler in 4 miles, but we had to pack it out 7. And the brutal part of that was we started out having to climb out 1,400 feet out of this basin because we couldn't go out the bottom of it because it got steep and had canyons and cliffs and things. So the only way out of there really was up the steep side and up on top and then down from there. So that was pretty brutal. Broke it up over a few days. I went in with one buddy one day. We each took out a load and then came in with another buddy another day. We each took out a load then. So broke it up into 4 loads. But yeah, it was way back. But, you know, I hate seeing other hunters when I'm out hunting and or competing with anybody. If there's somebody in my basin, I'll just go over to the next one. And so I like getting into elk where nobody else is. I'm not competing with somebody else to hunt them. And if that means going further in, that's what I'll do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of find that here in BC too. Just getting back there is half the trick sometimes, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's part of the experience too. You know, I don't really want to drive around the roads and spot an elk and go after them. I know you can be successful that way. It's just, I'd rather put some miles on and get back in there and get some more, you know, maybe unpressured animals, things like that. And, yeah, it's just part of the kind of hunt I enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. The experience is much richer.
Yeah. Do you do much off-season training with pack weight or anything, Bill, to get trained up for that?
Man, I did for a while there. You know, in those early years where I was pretty unsuccessful and I was just trying to improve everything I could. And, you know, one of them was I had a broadhead fail on an elk and started developing my own broadhead. I really tried to apply some of my own engineering to it there. And, I mean, that was one thing. Another thing was, you know, understanding elk behavior more. So I tried to spend more time around elk kind of year round and kind of get them figured out. Another one though was definitely, I mean, I felt like I thought I was in decent shape, but then you think you're in shape and then you go hunt elk at 12,000 feet and go up and down these steep ridges. And I realized that I had to get in way better shape or I was going to die out there. And I mean, I loved it, but at the same time, I'd never been so beat tired at the end of the day of hunting. So yeah, I went to a trainer, started kind of researching that. And I was training like I was an Olympic athlete there for a few years, just trying to really boost my cardio. I went to talked to a trainer that, and I worked for a corporation at the time as a development engineer. So we had, you know, fitness center and personal trainers kind of thing. And they'd have people come in. Well, I talked to an endurance coach that worked with a lot of like professional mountain bikers and stuff and got him to help me with the program. And I added like 6 hours of cardio a week on top of the fitness I was already doing. So I started biking. I got a road bike, started biking the hills to work. Like was 40 miles one way. So it was a 2.5 hour bike ride to get to work. But yeah, I just went kind of crazy over the top trying to improve fitness to where I could just hike straight up these, ridges in the high elevation and not have to stop and suck air for a while. But I don't do, I think doing that for many years kind of got my fitness level to a point where now I just kind of hike year round and do stuff year round. And I don't do as strict of kind of a training program, I guess. I'm always kind of hiking and often wearing a pack. So it's just kind of try to stay fit year round now that way.
Yeah. Right. Kind of turned it into a lifestyle.
Yeah, it did. And, when I had a corporate job and I had, busy 8 to 5 and, limited vacation, and it's different. It was different then than it is now, where this company's my full-time job. And, it's pretty flexible, right? I can go hunting as much as I want. It just doesn't pay the bills as well as if I do some work at the same time, but it's pretty flexible to where I can be out in the hills and mountains quite a bit.
I know. I mean, you said there earlier, Bill. How many years was it? Did you after you kind of had what was the moment you had when you decided to start making your own broadhead, and how many years before you actually came to market with one?
Yeah, there was a long span in there. And I remember the years now, but it was 2004. So I'd been in Colorado. I think it was my 4th elk season. And it was the first shot I had first time I had a shot at a nice bull. And I shot just a little forward and I caught the shoulder blade. I don't know if it was a back edge or what, of the shoulder blade, but that arrow barely penetrated and that bull ran off with the arrow sticking out of it. And I was really kicking myself and, looking at the broadhead then, and I could see that, man, this thing is pretty weak. Like, what was I thinking? But it was pretty much what was standard fixed blade broadheads at the time. But it really kind of clicked at that point that, hey, I've gone to school for engineering. I do product development of components, mechanisms for other companies. It kind of clicked at that point. I need to be applying this knowledge to something that's important, like bow hunting. And so, I spent a couple of years there of buying a bunch of broadheads and testing them. I remember I shot a cow with a rifle in late season that year, and I saved the shoulder blades and meat on them and hide on them and mounted them like a foot apart and shot a bunch of broadheads through them. And I did like a couple years of testing and research, but I think 2006 was the first broadhead I designed myself and got prototypes built. And when we actually launched our first product as a company, it was 2017. So it was 11 years later. And really I spent about 7 years iterating on the design. And then I just hunted with the final design for, 3-4 years there until between friends and family, we shot enough animals with them. And the performance was just so much better than anything we'd ever seen or used that decided to come out with it. I don't know that I ever really had planned to make a business out of it. It's just when I got to the point where it was like passing through animals, passing through bones and still looking like new and staying sharp. I really kind of surpassed my goals, what I thought I could achieve, which was I wanted to pass through even if I hit an elk shoulder blade. But it was performing at such a high level. And so many of my friends wanted them that I just decided to make production batch and see what happened.
Yeah, that's what I was just wondering. So it's a product
that kind of came out of necessity then. Go ahead, Wace. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that me and a buddy had kind of gotten a little bit of an argument the other day because I said, well, I think Bill had been working on them heads for quite some years before he actually came out to the market with them, and he was disagreeing with me. So I wanted to pop that question in right now.
Yeah, I looked back at my first prints and they have 2006 dates on them. So, and that was basically our V series head, but at the time I didn't have a bleeder yet. And I had a little thicker blades and I put a little less strength into the ferrule. But over time in testing, I realized that ferrule strength was really important and the connection to the arrow was really important as well. But yeah, that kind of main blade shape is is what I started with many, many years back after doing like a bunch of testing of other broadheads and then doing some like computer simulation, structural analysis, stuff like that for not only structural, but like aerodynamics and stuff too for flight. So, but yeah, it was something that I was just trying to make the ultimate broadhead for myself. And it was costing me so much to make that I didn't think I didn't think anybody would ever pay $100 for 3 broadheads, back then. But I think once you've used them and you realize what a step up it is, and that they cost so much more to make. So it's actually a better value of what you're getting for your money. I think once people have shot an animal, won through bone, things like that, they understand that it's kind of worth it. And so it's really taken off way more than I thought it would when I launched the company.
Yeah, looking at a lot of the competitors' broadheads on the market, it's like aluminum ferrule, stuff that doesn't stay sharp. And I mean, that kind of brings us to like the quality of manufacturing and the quality of materials that you use, right?
Yeah, for sure. Aluminum ferrules are very cheap to make. Aluminum is, you can machine it really quickly. It's lower cost. It's so that was kind of the mainstay for many years in fixed heads, and that's the kind of head that failed on me on that elk. And thin, most everybody uses a majority of heads are using like a 420 stainless blade steel, very cheap steel. And it does okay for sharpness and toughness. It's just not really great at either one. You really wouldn't ask a knife maker, tell him you want a knife out of 420 stainless steel, and he'll be saying, what? That's not really a blade steel. It's just kind of a low end, steel. So it's not ideal, but it's low cost to make. And, I don't blame broadhead manufacturers. I think they've been driven down over the years to get the cost as low as possible. Yeah. And that's a solution to do it, especially at a bigger company where there's a lot of overhead. Literally, if they're selling that broadhead for $10 to $13, they're only got a couple dollars into the materials manufacturing processes to make that thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you do see a lot of competitors now following suit with, coming out with higher end materials and kind of similar designs, quite honestly.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. I think, people are catching on and trying to do things similarly. I think, I'm not going to comment too much on that.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's
it makes me want to tell fewer of my, secrets, but definitely, the steels are important, and, testing a lot of different steels over the years to get one that had that really great, toughness and impact strength, along with that high hardness for edge retention. That's kind of, that's super important. And there's so many years of development with the heat treat and everything to get that. I feel like quite a few years ahead of what else is available yet today.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of to back up a little bit, I'd love to hear about like maybe one of the first animals you got on the ground with what turned into the finalized design type deal, or something along those lines, when you kind of maybe had like the aha moment, like, hey, we have something here.
Yeah, it was one year that I got 2 elk with the broadhead in its kind of final design, and the first one. So in Colorado, you can get a kind of either sex archery, and then you can get a antlerless archery. So you can shoot like one bull, one cow. And it was opening weekend in Colorado. I was up in the high basins. A lot of times opening day, they're way up high above timberline. And I was had this herd of elk below me, and I was kind of sneaking in on them. I was with a couple of buddies, and we kind of split up. They thought the elk were going to go, up basin. I thought they were going to go down. So I let those guys go, and then I went my own way. But the herd came by me, and I had the herd bull was at like, I don't know, I think it was 85 yards, which was beyond my shooting range at that time. The closest elk to me when the herd kind of walked in close was at 54 yards. So that was in my wheelhouse at the time. And it was a steep downward angle. But anyway, at 54 yards, I shot this cow. It went through kind of the meaty part of the shoulder. It zipped through and stuck in the like sandy dirt, 10 yards past her. And she ran about 10 yards and stopped, looked around and just fell and rolled down the hill. And called my buddies over. We went down and she actually rolled 300 yards down the hill. It was so steep, but, pulled the broadhead out of the ground, out of the sand, and just it looked perfect. I could still shave hair on it. And my buddies were kind of amazed by it. And one of them ended up being my initial co-founder, Eric. He was a younger guy that had kind of a marketing background, but
yeah,
he saw that. And then a week later, I didn't actually mean to use that same broadhead. I just stuck it back in my quiver, kind of at the back end of my quiver. But I shot a nice 6-point bull a week later, and I happened to grab out the same broadhead, and that bull, it was a long quartering away shot. So it had to go, it sliced the hip and it went all the way through from hip, and it poked out between like the brisket and the front shoulder.
Oh, wow.
So it went through like, I don't know what that is, 4 feet, 5 feet elk, something like that. I got that full pass through. And even though it hit way back, it sliced the hind quarter, even though I hit that far back and went up through the guts and everything, it went through the heart and still got an exit. And so, and when my buddies saw that too, they're like, man, you got to bring this to market. And my friend Eric that had that kind of some of the marketing sales background, I wasn't really interested in like doing the business side, getting the company set up, doing any sales and marketing, getting a website set up, but he knew how to do that stuff. So I'm like, hey, if you want to do that stuff, you can be my partner. So that's how it started. That's how we decided to launch it as a company.
That's awesome. I mean, when a product comes out of necessity like that, and it turns into something where everybody's like, okay, you have to bring this to market, you kind of know you're onto something at that point.
Yeah. And, even then I thought, I didn't think it would be enough to pay, so that it could be my full-time job. And it wasn't. For, 2 years, I didn't draw a paycheck, and I worked side jobs really to pay the bills. But the more I did it, the more I just loved doing product development on, products that I was just really passionate about. So it's like, it wasn't, work was never grueling. I always wanted to get up and work that day, whether it was designing, analyzing parts, or testing them in the lab, or going out shooting them on the range, or going out hunting with them. So it's it's just, to me, it's like living the dream. I love doing it. I do a ton of hunting now and a lot of product development work too.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And like when you can be passionate, I've said it before on here, when you can be passionate about what you're doing, it's a lot easier to be successful and keep driving forward, which you have been. And I mean, stuff has probably come a long way since that first head. And I'm sure there's been a bunch of iterations of it, right?
Yeah, there was several iterations before it came to market. And then I've just learned a lot of things over the last 4 years or so, a lot of improvements that I've kind of implemented as well. And going from the initial vented blade to a solid blade, and then our wide series last year, and now a single bevel that we're launching. I've been kind of developing that for a year and a half, and that's kind of intriguing how they rotate through an animal and kind of open up holes pretty good.
Yeah, I do want to get to that in a sec, but kind of one of the things I wanted to ask you, or what are some of the big things that impacted the direction? Because I mean, I don't know if the audience really knows, but I've done quite a bit of product development over the years for my old business that I ended up selling. But when you look at a broadhead like that works so well, I often wonder, like, how do you get manufacturing to the point where you can bring it to market and still have it not be like 58,000 SKUs with a different ferrule for each one and this and that. I'm just curious, like what kind of stuff impacted development for you?
Well, when we launched the company, we had two broadheads, a V100 and V125, and life was simple back then. And then we added the higher weights, the V150, 175, 200. But now we have, a V series, S series, wide series, single bevel series. We had a buff series, which is our basically without bleeders.
Yeah.
Kind of rolled that into our other series where you can just get like an S125 buff, which is basically that. It was the same broadhead without bleeders. And now I've been working with Aaron Snyder on this micro diameter system. And so we now have the Snyder core broadheads available also in really all those series. So it's gotten to be a lot of SKUs to manage. One thing we do to try and cut down the number of different parts we make is we reuse a lot of the ferrules. So we'll have a different ferrule for the different weights, but they're the same ferrules for our different series, like an S125 blade and a wide 125 blade are interchangeable in those broadheads because the ferrule's the same.
Yeah. I've totally taken advantage of that, like putting a wide blade onto an S100 that I already had.
Yeah, it lets people, if they want to have a mixed quiver of, I carry a mixed quiver a lot of, say, S125, wide 125, and then you can buy some replacement blades and switch more over to one or the other if you want to for a certain hunt. So it's, quite a few people have caught on to that and do that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, kind of going down the list here, you mentioned that there's solid, wide, and vented, right? And I've shot all of them now, and they all shoot super well, and they all kind of shoot better than I can. Is there kind of an application for each of those that you would sort of point people towards?
Yeah, the V and S series are really kind of the same. I think they're kind of out west, big game, long range shots. It's a relatively compact design. It's a great elk head. You can really kind of use it for everything, but the only difference there is the vents. Otherwise, the blade size is the same. And a few people, in theory, if you put vents in a blade, there's less surface area for any pressure to act to kind of push it off course. So a few people will find the vented to be a little more forgiving for them. Man, with a tuned bow, I've shot them all. I've shot the vented solid side by side, like, all summer long at long range, and they both shoot really well for me. The solid blade is quieter. It's stronger, but the vented blade is plenty strong enough. So, you can't break them on a bone or anything, but both those are kind of similar. I'd say they're just kind of a good all around out west big game head. The V series or the wide series is an 1 3/8 wide main blade, 3/4 inch wide bleeder, so 2 1/8 inch total cut. And that one, I really, had a lot of people, especially whitetail hunters, and it's true. They were blowing through deer and burying their arrow deep enough in the ground. They were all saying, I could certainly get a wider head through the deer. Can't make a wider one for, if I shoot back or, the shot placement's not perfect, you cut a little bigger hole. And so I pushed back on that for a while. I didn't want something that wouldn't fly as well or be as strong, but worked on it quite a bit. I feel really good about that head now. And it flies well too, but I kind of tell most people you can have long shots or not. If you're shooting just under 50 yards, I think either one's going to work well for you. If you're a lighter poundage, a kid or your wife or something that might have a lighter poundage, I might say, just go with their standard heads there. But, really we've got guys shooting recurves at, 50 pounds and putting wide heads through a lot of animals too. So they penetrate really well.
Yeah, and I mean those, like you said, those big vented wide heads are plenty strong. I missed a bear last spring and bounced it off of like a nice big solid rock, and it was like I just gave it a little touch up and it went back into the quiver, no big deal.
Yeah, for that wide 125, the vented, in all of our wide from 125 on up were vented last year. This year they're solid. The wide 150 is a solid blade, and from there up they're solid. But they're both super strong. I shot that wide 125 through a really big boar hog down in Texas, and quartering on downward, and it went through a lot of spine because it went down at a kind of an angle through it and buried into the pelvis. And so they penetrate great, and they go through bone really well too. We were just doing some high-speed video of shooting through bones in an Alabama hunt. We just posted that to our YouTube channel too. And check that out. But I was shooting right through leg bones and knuckles of deer with their single bevels and our wide, and it just cuts right through a knuckle. And the blade looks like new afterwards. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at this. I mean, but after working all these years, but it's just amazing what it can do compared to what I thought was possible, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
I've only shot one animal with a single bevel, and it was a bull moose with a long bow. And it was a blood trail like I've never seen, and he only trotted 10 feet and tipped over. So I know that the damaging effects of single bevels, and I just can't wait to see yours here in action. But are your single bevels just offered in a left-hand bevel, Bill?
They're in right hand currently.
Oh, right hands.
Yeah. I'm considering the left hand for next year. I'm not sure. Right hands seem to be the most popular out there, and I really just wanted to launch one way initially and see how it went. And that's I mean, it's just the way I was fletched personally, and the way I tested it all year, so that's what it came out with. But I'm getting quite a few requests for left as well. Which way do you guys fletch?
Right.
I'm right hand helical.
Good. So they'll work well for you guys. So it's set up for that.
Yeah. Is there an application where you would send somebody to the single bevel versus your standard setup?
Man, I've I feel I have 100% confidence in our S series broadheads. For big animals, moose, elk, whatever, and getting max pass through. I think we had 7 guys get complete pass throughs on Cape Buffalo with them last year. In the buff version, the non-bleeder. So, I mean, that penetrates great. I don't some people. A lot of, Ashby followers, and I'm actually working with the Ashby Foundation and talking to those guys. They got a lot more testing planned where there's a lot of people would say a single bevel will out penetrate a double bevel. Man, I don't see how it necessarily would. It's rotating. So, I think it'd be using up more energy versus just hitting and slicing straight through. What I can say in all my testing is, they're penetrating great. If I shoot them through ballistic gel, they penetrate the same, the single and double bevels. I don't think that's a great material to test, though. I just feel like there's too much shaft friction that dominates that stopping power there. But I'm planning to do more testing, and the Ashby Foundation is doing some testing through like Big Buffalo in Africa, with a lower poundage bow and different broadheads. So I believe they're going to have some of my single bevel and double bevel to see if they see a difference. And I'm really interested to see what they say there. And I've got some other testing planned where I'm going to be comparing a single to double bevel. Everything I've shot, I've just passed through really well with both. animals, but I've got some ideas in mind how I can get an actual comparison on which penetrates further. So right now it looks like they're pretty similar. I wouldn't say it's better than the double bevel. The cool thing about it though is that rotation is a kind of it opens up holes.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of get sidetracked here for a second and kind of touch on the Ashby thing a little bit and kind of pick your brain on it. Because there was a while there where everybody was really diving into the FOC thing and just kind of getting absurd. So in my little book of questions here, I have what point is it too much? And
yeah,
I mean,
are you guys, let me ask, are you guys traditional? You guys shoot recurves or compounds or or both, or what do you guys hunt with?
Yeah. So WAC only shoots a recurve, and I mostly hunt with a compound, and I've been getting more into the stick bow stuff lately.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of a different, they're kind of two different machines really.
Totally.
But, it's good to know what you're shooting, so I know which way to approach it. But on the FOC thing, so the rocket science there is that if you have a higher FOC, and really it's not, I don't call it FOC, it's like it's static margin. It's how far ahead of your, how far towards the front is your center of mass compared to the center of pressure. Not having to go into a lot of detail there, but basically if you think about it like a teeter-totter where you've got this, your center of mass is where the arrow is going to kind of pivot around. Yep. And you've got your veins in the back that are, if let's say that arrow comes out of your bow with they call it initial disturbance, but let's say it's fishtails a little bit. You're shooting your recurve, comes off your fingers. And not only is it flexing around the riser, but it says also kicks a little bit, fishtails to the left. So when you fishtail, you've got your veins are going to have some pressure on them from that airflow by it. That'll push it back to center. Your broadheads will have pressure on it the other direction, trying to push it off center. So putting that FOC towards the front, you got a longer lever arm, kind of the teeter-totter where your veins will correct it better. And it makes it more stable. So there's reason to have your center mass, forward, especially if you've got a bigger broadhead on the front. It helps. And that's also the reason why you want more veins on the back if you got a bigger broadhead on the front at all. But if you get too much, it's hard to get higher. It's hard to get like very high FOC without also increasing your arrow mass. Yeah. And both those things limit your trajectory. So for me personally, I've typically shot an arrow in that 500 grain range because, higher mass will get you some higher retained momentum and more penetration, but your trajectory drops off. So I kind of tell people, well, shoot as high of mass as you can for the trajectory you want, Yeah. And so for me, it's typically in that 500 range or a little more. And then FOC, I've been, 12 to 16%, I'd say, depending on my different setups over the years. I'm right now, I'm about 14 to 15, but yeah, there's some people are saying if you push your FOC from 19% to 23%, you can double your penetration. Well, the physics doesn't really say that at all. No. The physics for penetration is just your momentum along that straight line of the arrow. Whatever your momentum is before you impact is going to be translated to some force over time. And FOC doesn't really enter into there. Where FOC comes into place is if FOC affects how straight your arrow is going into the animal, then it can have an effect. But I can't see that. I think people trying to drive their FOC way up, I don't think there's a good reason for it. yeah, increasing it will increase your stability. Increasing your mass and your FOC, I think, can increase penetration some. But yeah, I don't go crazy about it personally.
Yeah, and I mean that seemed to be what guys were doing, is they were just getting out of hand, thinking, you know, if I put 250 in the front of this arrow, it'll zip right through. I think you get to the point of diminishing returns, right?
Yeah, and so I've got a couple different friends that are custom arrow builders, and they run into that a lot. Somebody will say, I want to have 19% FOC, but I also want this weight. And then they'll come back to them and say, well, you know, this is as high of FOC you can get with this spine arrow. If I go higher than that, you're going to be under spine. They're like, yeah, I don't care. I want to go higher anyway. So they will, to get that certain FOC number, they're often under spined to get there.
Oh, wow.
And that's where it goes wrong. If you, because I mean, even Ashby studies, I think number 1 and number 2 was, one was like perfect arrow flight. The arrow flight is more important. If your arrow's not going straight and it's not hitting, you know, where you want it to hit, you know, you just wrecked all your penetration. So yeah, there's definitely, I do agree that people were kind of going crazy on FOC numbers, and they were making a lot of compromises that overall was a negative thing for them.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of always been the guy that uses point weight to break down the spine if I'm over spined, right? And then kind of as long as I don't get too heavy. I'm shooting a little bit of a heavy arrow for my draw length, but it works well for me. And I mean, that kind of brings us to the next kind of thing that we sort of already touched on, is just like speed versus weight. What do you think's the threshold for a good tuning fixed blade broadhead that isn't too slow, so you don't end up with like a mile long sight tape? Because I sure notice a difference when I'm trying to tune a fixed blade between something going 260 feet per second and then guys trying to spit them out of like 310 feet per second bows.
Yeah, good question. I know our V series, I had one of my setups that I was testing back then was going 311 feet per second. And just because I was trying to test a high speed setup. I got a new bow, and my older bow, which was 5 years older, with that same arrow setup, all of a sudden it was, screaming fast. And then I added, weight to my arrow and head to get it down more in that 280, 285 range. But I would say that, at that speed, you can get our broadheads to shoot well, but everything's, the tune's got to be better. Your form's got to be better. Everything. It's just less forgiving when you're going at that velocity. Also, I really don't see much good reason to do that for hunting. I mean, if you're shooting 3D tournaments and you're judging yardage, eyeball judging, I can see trying something screaming fast. But for hunting, it's more mass is better. It just is. You're going to have more momentum, and that's what gives you penetration. That higher velocity, you shed a lot of that velocity because, drag is proportional to velocity squared. So by the time you get out there to that animal, you've already lost a lot of momentum because of that velocity that's getting shed. And people don't realize this either, but just going through that animal takes a lot more force at higher speed. So you're less likely to get that penetration. And you're better off with a more massive arrow going slower because the drag force is lower, the force to penetrate is lower, and you've got more mass that force is acting against. So force is mass times acceleration. It's going to go further through. So for hunting, I get these guys a lot to say, I got to go, 310 or whatever feet per second because I can't have that extra drop, or that I need the arrow to get there fast. And no, it doesn't change speed that much. The arrow time it takes the arrow to get there doesn't change very much. It's not really going to make a difference of whether that animal's, ducked an extra inch or not. The extra mass is going to help you, especially if he does duck and you hit the spine or a deer I just shot a few days ago in Texas. It was perfectly broadside when I shot at it, at this doe, and I knew there were jumpy deer there. And anyway, I aimed at the heart, kind of the bottom of the heart, but she ducked and turned into the arrow, and it ended up hitting right above the knuckle, right in the shoulder bone, but in the thickest part. And it broke through there, passed through her. It was stuck in the dirt 10 yards behind her, and she ran a short ways and died. But I thought I made like a perfect, behind the shoulder shot. And then when I did the autopsy, I realized what really happened. And it seemed like it was, oh, this is a perfect setup. It's broadside. And I hear a lot of guys say that too. Like, I don't need a broadhead to go through bone. I just take, appropriate shots, broadside. But you can take a shot that looks totally perfect and that animal can move on you. So, that's why you need to be able to, that's why mass is your friend there, I think, for getting to those bones.
So you would take momentum over speed if you, any day?
Yeah, well, momentum is mass times velocity. And it's really that product of the two that gives you that, so mass times velocity will be equal to force times time. And it's just really just that second law of motion, F equals ma, that you've converted to that to get momentum in there. So it's really the product of the two. But the advantage of having more of that come from mass than velocity is that that velocity increases your drag force. So you're losing that velocity on the way to the animal and through the animal. So having more mass will give you more penetration than having more velocity. And so that's why I say in general, go with as much mass as you can for the trajectory that you're happy with. And for me in my compound, that is like this year I had a 75-pound VXR, and at 530 grains, I could still dial my sight down to 122 yards and use my hunting arrow setup to go shoot total archery challenge, where I knew that's how far the shots were going to be. But I like to practice to 100 yards and beyond. And I think doing that makes me really effective on animals, and that I get a lot of shots in that 60 to 70 yard range on mule deer and elk as well. And so I want to be able to shoot at that range and have it flat enough I can, be off by a few yards on, if I range and they walk a few yards, I got to guess, not have my arrow dropping so much that it's that I'm going to be off if I'm off by judging by a few yards. So in general, I say go as massive as you can with the trajectory that you're happy with. And a lot of times I'll tell people, just get some heavier field points, get an arrow spine properly, and just do some shooting out there. See what, how much further it drops in your last year's setup if you have more mass. And a lot of times it's not as much as people think. It's hard to get the guys to go from 100 grain head to 125 grain heads a lot of times.
Yeah.
And, on a 500 grain arrow, that's 5%. Guys, it's 5% change in mass. Why are you so hung up on a 100 grain head versus a 125? And it's just something that's been in their head. Why we shot 100 grain heads. But it's really your total mass up front that you should be thinking about. And 25 grains isn't really that much. And I think people would be surprised that you hardly got to move your pins at all with 25 grains added weight up front, but it can be a better setup for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny. A lot of the arrow stuff that you see, guys online or it's hilarious. I had a guy preaching to me about having a 375 grain arrow the other day for his mechanical, because he needs his mechanical to get there quickly. I was like, well, your bow sounds like a gun going off, and when it gets there, it's not going to have any momentum because it's super light. But I mean, there's a ton of guys.
I hunted.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I hunted in Alabama a few weeks ago with. I was down there testing our single bevel heads, and there was a few guys that were down there hunting. And one of them was one of the guides there. And I gave him some iron will broadheads, and he shot a buck with this iron will while he was there. And it was the same buck he hit 40 days earlier with a mechanical head. Very popular rear deploying mechanical. And you could see the scar on the shoulder blade, right on the scapula where he hit it with that. So, and then when he shot it with the iron will, he broke the offside shoulder, and it passed through and stuck like 8 inches in the dirt. So we saved that to our Instagram story, him telling me the story and looking at that scar. So he's shooting a 70-pound bow, and it hits the scapula, which is not thick, on a white-tailed deer in Alabama. Yeah. And it couldn't penetrate that scapula at all. It stopped right there. The deer ran away with the arrow hanging out, and it just fell out. So mechanicals, I just can't see why people shoot them anymore, honestly.
Yeah. One of me and Wasey's mutual buddies is he's a super successful bow hunter, and he's a big mechanical guy, but he also just has skill oozing out of his fingertips, and I don't see him making a ton of mistakes.
Yeah. A lot of professionals use them too, right? Pro archers that use them. Maybe some are paid to use them, but I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
A lot of them are paid really well to use them, but some of them I do think though they just hitting exactly where they want to within an inch at long range has been their mindset for so many years, because it's their job and it's their paycheck, that they value that above all else and want to, they want to be off by an inch kind of a thing. And they're really good shots too. Right. And they've probably learned that a lot of them will shoot back, or they know which shots are a problem, but they have deer move on them too, and have failures as well. And I think it's bad for the average guy. I hear about it all the time from customers.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Bill. But all I was going to say is the marketing guy for Rage, that guy needs a raise, because he did one heck of a job, especially when he scooped Chuck Adams. I was just like, whoa! And they turned that head into a household name just with marketing. It was actually amazing.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked to the guy that did the initial high-speed video on it, where it showed that it opened up before entry versus other ones opening up after, and that really is what kind of had them take off. And yeah, they made a lot of money, and they have a big marketing budget, no doubt. But yeah, so I got questions for you guys.
Yeah, shoot.
Where you're living there, what kind of animals do you have running around there?
You want to go first, Wace?
Yeah. Well, I'm up in Alberta, Bill, so just your typical Canadian stuff, right? We chase moose, bears, and muleys and whitetails and all that stuff. So that's kind of what I hang my hat on, is moose hunting every year. So, and that's actually kind of how I landed into your heads. I had kind of a coming to Jesus moment, like Snyder says, with running I had a head fail on me on a bull moose, cost me that bull actually. And then that's when I bought some of your heads, and that's what kind of led me down that path.
Yeah. So what kind of terrain is it around there?
I'm in the heart, pretty much. Yeah. I'm pretty much in the heart of the boreal forest here. So it's real thick, pretty rugged.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, I'm in BC, and I hunt all over BC. So we have everything. Everything except speed goat, basically.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rad. And me and Wasey usually meet in southern Alberta every year, and I litter that place in iron will broadheads and axis arrows. So in 100 years, they'll find some artifacts.
What do you guys hunt together down there?
Mule deer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I kind of where I wanted to go with that mechanical conversation, Bill, was you don't think there's a place for mechanicals at all? I mean, Snyder always says they were invented for guys that can't tune.
I mean, no. I mean, I've tried to.
I know I'm putting you on the spot, right?
Yeah, well, I've tested a bunch in the last. I hadn't really used them much personally for hunting when there weren't any when I started, and the ones I had played around with, I just wasn't too impressed with, and then moved to Colorado, started elk hunting, and had that fixed head failure. And I mean, there's no way I was going to go to a mechanical at that point. You go the wrong direction, really. But the last few years, I've tested them more to try and, I try to keep an open mind, and I try and not come to something with my, biases of what I think's best. I try and make kind of data-driven decisions. So I bought some of the more popular ones. I measured the force to push down through like hide and meat and shoulder blades, and it was crazy high.
Yeah.
And I also shot them through bones. I shot them through scapula. I shot them through like deer scapula, moose scapula, and then some femurs, and just exploded those things. And even just through like deer, I guess it was probably elk scapula and moose scapula, where the ones that got through them, the blades, a lot of times both blades are broke off, or one would be, or one would be broke off. They won't be bent so bad. And that's a pretty thin bone. It really is. The scapula is not thick, and these were fresh. So, I mean, I can push through with my broadhead by hand, like no problem. And these, the blades are breaking off on the mechanicals. So, I mean, to me, they're just, they're terrible. They're, it's, for what it's trying to do, impact an animal and get through it. It's just, from a mechanical engineering standpoint, it just doesn't make any sense. People would use them. I mean, I know why they do it. It's, the guys maybe want to shoot long range and they struggle getting their fixed head to shoot that far. But I think if they just put a little more time into their bow tuning, if they did some of the things to help themselves out, like a little more arrow mass, a little more FOC for stability, a little more vein in the back. And, like just for instance, like 3 blazers or 3 max hunters at 2.5 degrees offset or helical. That's about all it takes, really. And I mean, that versus guys they'll have a real light arrow set up. They'll have a few little target fletches. It'll be straight fletched or barely, or maybe 1 degree, because that's what you get off the shelf everywhere. And those things are all working against them. Not only with the fixed head, but with their mechanical too. They're just gonna, if it's not well tuned and not flying well, it's gonna have, poor retained energy out there as well. So it's one solution, but it's not a good one. There's a much better one, I think, which is, you use a better arrow for a fixed head and do the little bit of tuning work and arrow setup work to get them flying well at whatever range you want to. Because I shoot them at. I've got a range out here that I shoot at my 100-yard target almost every day. I'll throw a few arrows out there. Maybe not in the deep of the winter here, but most through spring and summer I do, and they shoot really well at that distance if you're bows tuned and decent arrow setup.
Yeah, I mean, Wasey's like an unreal archer, and I'm like Joe Average, so we have some juxtaposition on this podcast. But I've never had an issue getting the iron wills to group with my field points out to like 70 or 80, and I'm not anything special. So I mean, that says a lot.
Yeah, that's great. And it's rare that we have somebody that, most of the feedback we get is like the best flying fixed head they've shot. Cause they just spin true and they're, on center and things like, and they're low drag by design for a fixed head, things like that. But, occasionally we'll have somebody that'll struggle and I'll send them some tips and it's, it's typically like they're underspined. They got really small fletch on. They just don't know anything about bow tuning at all. Kind of walk them through like paper tuning and fixes the problems.
I mean, not even really specific to iron will, but how often do you go to the range and you see a guy that has his sight all the way one direction, his rest all the way one direction, he's gripping the hell out of his bow, and it's like you have so many resources now, and it's like guys are just struggling so hard on some of this stuff, and the last thing it ever is the equipment, which is, I mean, it's sort of sad, right? That they're not seeking out help and going, oh, I can deal with this stuff and everything will shoot good, you know?
Yeah. I was helping a guy get set up in paper tune. And I had him shoot through paper, and every tear was like a 2-inch tear, and everyone was a different direction. I said, man, we got to work on the form thing. Don't even worry about, trying to get your bow tuned at this point. Just work on your form and not gripping that, the way your veins are popping, your muscles are popping out on your hand there when you're shooting. This shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
You never know what level people are at, but yeah. And form can definitely be an issue if people are cranking their bow. And I mean, their field points aren't going to shoot well either, but I'm sure their broadheads are going to shoot worse if they're torquing their bow.
Yeah, it seems like everything with the fixed blade is magnified when you do have issues, though, right?
I mean, it is. And I mean, that's just aerodynamics. If you got
an extra sail.
If that arrow's tipped to one side and you've got this wind going across it, it's going to create this pressure difference from one side of a vane or a blade, one side or the other, because it's not going straight anymore. It's off. The wind's coming across the side of it. Yeah. It creates some pressure. So it creates a force that wants to push it off. And if you, and if you don't have any vane back there to correct it, and it's also one of the reasons you don't want to have like a really heavy arrow, and a light head really, is that that pushes your center of mass back towards the middle of the arrow, so that the vane and the broadhead kind of have an equal weighting on that teeter-totter. And if you have a heavy arrow, little fletch, you're probably not going to get any fixed head to fly very well for you. So, in a mechanical, it's going to have less surface area up front there. So there's less to worry about, and you can get by with, less fletch on the back, for instance, with those.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do feel like, though, with a fixed blade, if you really mess up a shot and put it through the shoulders, you're going to be in better shape with the fixed blade, right? You're not just going to bounce off of them.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, a 2-blade head or 2-blade with bleeders will penetrate a lot better than a 3-blade through any kind of shoulder blade or bone. Just a 3-blade trying to split in 3 directions outward takes way more force. Like I'm measuring like 5 to 8 times as much force to push through scapula. Not that you can't, get through them with the right setup and things, but definitely a durable 2-blade will penetrate better for you. And mechanicals are just so much higher they're like 15 times higher force to get through scapula than our heads. So it's just crazy how much energy is used up just on impact with those.
Yeah, that brings me to 2 separate things I have here. One of them is, do you think there will ever be an iron will 3-blade? And I think you kind of just answered that, right?
I think I think kind of the 2-blade with bleeders is better. It just splits through. I think bone and things better.
Less drag, right?
Yeah, less drag through the animal. Just that cut on contact way to go. And I also like splitting, say, bone or whatever with the front of the arrow. With that, it's kind of acts like a 2-blade through bone, because the bone is broken apart so far. But by the time that bleeder gets through, which is set back,
it doesn't wedge.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't wedge, and it doesn't really reduce penetration very much at all. But it gives you that cross cut. So.
Got it.
All my testing, that works way better than the 3-blade. Will I ever make a 3-blade? I don't know. I think the 2-blade with bleeders is a better option for sure.
Got it. And then I kind of threw this to Instagram too, so I didn't miss anything, right? And I think I pretty well had everything covered, but the boys from the Stickbow Chronicles were like, how come these things penetrate 3 times better than the next closest competitor?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's, sharpness is huge. And I didn't realize that when I started developing the broadheads, but it makes sense, right? If you got to, let's say you're going to just poke a knife into let's say a dead animal that's laying there, you just want to poke in to cut through that hide. And let's say you want to poke into the hind quarter, right through the hide and the meat. It makes sense. If you got a dull knife, it's going to be way harder to push through than a really sharp knife, right?
Yeah.
And a super sharp knife that retains the edge really well, there's very low force to like keep pushing right on all the way through that animal. I mean, it makes total sense. But what I didn't realize when I started is that a lot of broadheads out there aren't sharp, and even the ones that are fairly sharp, it's just kind of all relative. When you zoom them up to 200x, they're really not sharp compared to our head. And it's having that high hardness of 60 Rockwell C. You can grind. It's got such high compressive strength. You can grind that and get a super fine edge, but yet have good strength and retain that edge. So I can shoot through an animal if I'm not hitting any big bone. Just kind of shoot through an animal and look at it afterwards, and it can look the same as it did before I shot through it. And that's the same with like shooting 5 times in foam, like a Reinhardt or something. And other blades just aren't like that. And I measure the force the first time through high, and then I measure the force the second time through height on those, and the forces start going up. And the force on ours doesn't. You can go through it multiple times and not see any change in force. And so that's why, and really, for whatever momentum you have, or say whatever usable energy you have when you hit that animal, it's going to be translated to a force times a distance. So you cut that force in a third, you're going to get 3 times the distance of penetration. So
there you go.
That's it.
Nice.
Do you think, I don't want to make this like a bash the competitor broadhead podcast, but forever, Bill, you know this as much as anybody, that's what was on the market. And, I think you said earlier how, the manufacturers were pushed to, have a more effective price point. But I kind of think it was the opposite. I think they're trying to have a higher profit margin. So that's why they're running lesser steels and, lesser ferrules, because they want to make money, right? They're not in the game for your success. They want to make money.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is kind of some of both that, the market didn't want to pay more than, $10 a broadhead or something like that, $10-12. But also, the bigger the company is, the more overhead they're going to have, and the more they're going to be just, they're going to have financial guys at the top of the company, driving a lot of the decisions. And it's going to be, let's make money. And so, and so definitely they want the manufacturing cost to be, they really want it to be like 25% or less of the selling price. So they've got a big chunk of overhead to pay all the salaries for all the people, at the top, all the marketing costs, the advertising, pay all the sponsors, all that has to come out of there. And then they want a good amount of profit at the end. So and that's one of the reasons I'm not too worried about anybody making something exactly like mine, even if they figured out kind of all my secrets of manufacturing. But because I don't think most companies don't want to operate at a low margin. I've got pretty low overhead in my company. So I can tell you that most companies would look at that business and say, there's just not enough profit there to make that worthwhile. They won't want to put that much money into materials or manufacturing processes and sell it for as little as I do, even though it seems like I'm selling it for a lot. It's not a lot over. I mean, a majority of it is materials manufacturing processes. And I could tell you that no big company is interested in doing something like that.
Yeah. I mean, they're leaving margin for the wholesale dealer and to retail, right? So
right,
your model's a little different.
That, but you're right. They need to leave a big cut there for 35-40% on top for the retailer as well.
Yeah.
And I hear guys, balk at the price of your heads. And guys even in my inner circle, they don't shoot them, but they're looking at buying them, and it's not hard to try and come up with enough, like $100 to get 3 heads. Like if you just don't buy 2 cases of beer in a month, you pretty much got it, right? So some of these guys, I think they want to say, well, the price point is it's too high, but I think you can make it work if you want to, and I think once people try your head, they'd be surprised, because what you get for the price.
Yeah, I think people spend money on the wrong things. I mean, just hunting in general too. Like, guy might spend $50 on a pair of merino wool underwear, but he doesn't want to spend more than $10 on a broadhead. And the more I've tried to be a better bow hunter over the years and perfect kind of, all my gear and my bow and arrow and broadhead and things is I realize more and more how important that broadhead is. And I'm not trying to do a big sales pitch. If people don't think it's worth the money for that much, I'm not going to try and talk them into it. I think, most customers that come to us, they're trying to, push the edge and get something better, or they had a failure and they just don't want to live through that pain again. But I think the mindset, the broadhead is a disposable and you don't want to pay much for it. It doesn't really make sense if you think about how important that is to the whole hunt, and everything going on there on that impact.
Yeah. And it's realistically, it's cheap insurance for when you do make a maybe questionable shot and get into a spot of the animal you shouldn't.
Yeah. And it happens. I mean, it happens to, I'm shooting a bow almost every day, practice as much as I can. I perfected my shots, and, deer move on you. Or you catch a little, twig you didn't see. It just happens, to the, because I hear that a lot. Well, you just need better shot placement. Well, yeah. I mean, I work on that too, for sure, but you can't always control that.
Shit happens.
Yeah, stuff happens. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So kind of moving forward here a bit, you do have a bunch of new stuff that you've kind of just announced and is available for pre-order. We talked about the single bevel, but you kind of are, how do I say it? You're kind of trying to perfect the micro arrow thing, and kind of looks like building upon the Deep Six thing to me to something that's more robust, right? With the new, I think you guys call it the Snyder core system. Right.
Yeah. It's something I've been working with Aaron Snyder on for quite a few months now. I personally shot micro diameter arrows for, I think it was 5 years ago now. I shot them for a couple of years with the Deep Six system, and then some collars I made there. And, it wasn't quite worth it to me over the strength of the 204 system, with using our hit insert and impact collar, and standard, shank broadheads. That's just a super robust system. So that's majority of what I've been shooting for the last, 4 or 5 years here. But same time, I've been playing around with micros a little bit every year and trying to come up with a better system there. And then, what Aaron's been doing with the 204 system of ours is just screwing the hit insert onto the broadhead and like hot melt gluing the whole thing in.
Yeah.
So you just got one long solid kind of shank in there, puts the impact collar on first, and then hot melt glues the whole thing on. And just telling me how robust that thing is, and all the animals and rocks and everything else he shoots with it. And so we started working together. He wanted a long glue in shank, and And that's what I designed up first, actually. But the more I thought about it and having to add all the different ferrule types, and then knowing that people would also want a screw-in kind of option if possible, we came up with this system, this core system. We're calling it Snyder core system, because really he had a lot of input in the development design of it. We kind of the two of us worked together on it and bounced a lot of ideas back and forth. But it's a 1-inch long shank. Before you get into the threads, use it with our impact collar. And then the threads on the back, you can glue that straight in with a 1-inch, or you can add one of our 1/66 diameter hit inserts to the back, and they start at about 1.25 inches long. So you end up with you end up with about 2.5 inches of solid core there in the arrow, plus that impact collar. Makes it a very, very strong, robust system in that micro diameter size.
Yeah, that's awesome. Somebody asked too, when I kind of went to Instagram, they were asking about the new core system and if you could run it so you could thread in your point to it, like a standard kind of setup with the weight in the back and then that hit insert in front.
Yeah, you can. We make hit insert tools already out of hardened steel that just push like standard hits in the right depth, but we're making custom tools here to push it in. And I'm actually making one for a 1/66 diameter arrow and one for 1/65 diameter arrows, because the manufacturers out there can't disagree on one size, I guess.
That's not a pain in the ass at all.
Oh, geez.
I hear you.
I can't believe there isn't one standard size there. But what I'm making 2 hit tools because what those have is they have these little steel rings that kind of they push the hit insert in, and then they kind of scrape the bore on the way out to take any adhesive out. Yeah. And so I want that to be like, dead nuts on with that bore of that arrow. So I'm actually making 2 sizes to that. Yeah. And if you wonder what size your arrow is, if you shoot an Easton, a gold tip, a VAP, those are all 1/66. I'm forgetting one there. And then Black Eagle's a 1/65. And then, there's a handful of smaller companies that are kind of doing some of each, but those are some of the major ones anyway.
Yeah. So guys out there don't need to panic. You can run it like a standard setup and not have to hot melt your whole rig in. I think some guys were panicking a little bit.
Yeah. To be honest, I kind of thought Snyder was crazy, a year or so ago when he was just gluing all the 204 in with the hit with hot melt, and saying that how much he really liked it and I should try it. And so, like, man, I used hot melt back when I was like a teenager. That's how we put knocks and inserts in back then. But that stuff was super brittle too. And it was. And you kind of would wreck arrows trying to get this thing back out. But this hot melt, and we're gonna have it on our website for sale pretty soon here too, is it's much better. It's kind of a rubber toughened, and you can. So it's not as easy to remove as just unscrewing. Yeah. But it's really not that hard. I just went to Texas with a dozen, and I had 3 of them that were a dozen arrows, and 3 of them were field points. And they were all glued in just completely with hot melt. And I ran into enough hogs that I was launching arrows at that I needed to convert those 3 field tips over to broadheads. And so I had my I was camped out there. So I had my jet boil. I boiled some water, which takes like a minute and a half in that thing. And then I stuck the end of the arrow in there for 10 to 15 seconds. Just take your pliers and grab onto the tip and pull it out. And now your arrows, so literally in like a couple of minutes, my arrow's ready to start over. And the nice thing about that over like gluing in a hit with epoxy is it can be really hard to get those out of 1/66 diameter arrows without wrecking them. So this is a way
I don't think I've ever got an insert out ever without wrecking it.
I shouldn't even tell people this because they'll wreck an arrow and want me to pay for it. But I've had some success with 204 diameter with our, hardened steel and titanium hits by taking a drill bit in the back that's that diameter and swinging the thing and popping them out. And our hardened steel can typically take that impact without deforming. But
don't do it around your children.
What's that?
I said, don't do it around your children, folks.
Oh yeah,
someone's going to lose an eye.
I forget I said that. Don't try that at home. But, anyways, a 166, it doesn't really work. The drill bit's not heavy enough. So this is a way that, anyway, you can hot melt glue them in, and it actually works a lot better than I thought. And it's strong. I've hung just about hung my body weight from that thing and not pulled it out that way. But for people that just want to glue it and screw in, you can just use our new hit tool. You can push that in, so you can bond it in like you normally would a hit insert, and then you can thread in and out of that. So that works too.
So since we have a mechanical engineer on the line here that has a gazillion patents and all that kind of stuff, what about like insert epoxy versus some of these impact gels versus hot melt? If everything's if everybody's doing everything right, is there a major advantage to going to like using that 2-part epoxy that comes with, say, Easton's over what some guys like me do when they're lazy and building arrows in a real big hurry? Is there a big strength advantage?
So what do you like to use? What glue?
I do like to use the 2-part epoxy, but I've been guilty of not mixing it up sometimes and just using whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've used different products to bond, in the engineering jobs over the years. Yeah. When it's needed. And the 2-part epoxy is really hard to beat for strength. That being said, I think Easton qualifies to their 2-part epoxy, or they're like rubber toughened cyanoacrylate. It's basically like a super glue, but it's rubber toughened. And a lot of pro shops do that as well because it's so fast. It shouldn't be as strong in theory. I'm actually going to do some push force tests myself here soon, because I want to compare those two to this hot melt glue I'm going to be selling to see, can you just hot melt glue your hit insert in there and have that, and just thread in and out of it and have that be strong enough? I think you can, but I'm going to get some push force testing to see. So, I can tell you that epoxy should be stronger. Yeah. Can these other things work? Can these other things work okay? Probably, but all my work has been on the 2-part epoxy because, when I licensed the hit insert technology from Easton, I worked with their engineers, and that's what they recommended and had a lot of testing on. And so rather than kind of put a lot of engineering time into bonding, I just use what they said, they developed and worked. So,
how much, like with your impact collars and with your heads and your whole system, how much like lateral force is on that insert? If you're, say, hitting something straight on, isn't the bulk of it kind of loaded up into that collar? That's a hard question.
The collar takes a lot of it on a straight impact. It's driven back into the collar and the threads, and it probably is really pushing on both of those. And then the arrow, as the collar gets pushed in, the arrow is flexing a bit too. But, the collar, I would say, is giving you a majority of the strength improvement over just having the hit insert, like your aluminum hit insert and carbon arrow. When that gets impacted, that carbon arrow can flex a lot more if there's no impact collar on there. Yeah. And so you're driving back, and then aluminum or brass inserts are pretty soft, so you can push into those teeth and deform them just enough to where it maybe isn't going to spin perfectly. Yeah. So, having that impact, just adding the impact collar to your standard inserts, standard hits out there is a big improvement. but adding impact collar and like a high strength titanium or hit insert is kind of the full package. And that's super robust, I think, when you do that.
Yeah. 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 That totally makes sense. I've messed around with it a bunch. And I mean, I think we've all seen a picture of a 5mm Easton arrow that has a field point driven an inch into it and the insert slid back, right? Like, and the collar, I think, really solved that for a lot of people.
Yeah. And that collar takes a lot of that force off of the hit as well too. So I don't ever see anybody popping a hit out when they're using our collar.
No.
But I think it's a lot more likely to happen without the collar if you get all that force driving back into it, and damaging that carbon arrow, and then all that force trying to pop that hit backward as well. Yeah.
So this is going to be kind of a loaded question because you're obviously regularly messing with new stuff that you're developing, right? Ultimate arrow build. I guess if you had to do like a catch-all, like Tommy comes to Bill and says, I'm shooting a 70-pound bow, I want to go hunting. What components would you throw at him?
Yeah, I really like a 204 ID arrow. I think it can be super robust if you use that with a hit insert and then our broadhead kind of line directly to the ID of that shaft, and then the impact collar. I think Easton makes good arrows. Their Easton match grade, I should say, are very, very straight, consistent spine. I've got arrows from, I think, every manufacturer sitting over here. Well, maybe not every, but several arrow manufacturers, and I measure spine and straightness. And I think it's hard to beat the big companies for having, the quality control there to do that. But I like Easton arrows, match grade. I like Black Eagle. They're also very good, very straight, consistent spine. And I used to shoot gold tip a lot years ago. Haven't shot them much lately. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying I feel very confident in Black Eagle and Easton right now. But yeah, a carbon arrow with decent wall thickness, and I like kind of going to a stiffer spine and putting a little more weight up front. And it's going to kind of depend on what the animal is and what your setup is, what you can get away with. But that's a good way to go. I like 3 a little bit higher profile veins in back at say 2.5 degrees, 2.5, 3 degrees. Max Hunters is what I've used a lot last couple of years, but I mean Blazers, Fusion 2, Q2i, they're all about the same profile shape. I think Bullies are about that size too. That size of a vein in 3 fletch works well. I mean, a lot of guys like to do 4 fletch now, but to me, I don't like adding weight in back. It moves the FOC back. It adds more drag, adds more noise that isn't really needed, I don't think. So I think the 3, I'm less popular, I guess, among a lot of the celebrities these days. But I like 3 vein. I think it's more efficient for having the amount of mass you got back there.
Yeah. I actually went back to 3 vein this year to try to maybe buck a little bit more of the wind down there in southern Alberta. So,
hey Bill, I kind of wanted to switch gears a little bit. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I seen you went on a caribou hunt last year, so maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I did. That was amazing. It was my first time going hunting in Alaska. First time really ever seeing a caribou. And, we flew out of Kotzebue and, got just kind of a flight service that flew us in. I think we went like 160 miles north up into the south end of the Brooks Range, and he just dropped us off for a week up there, me and a couple of buddies. And so, yeah, it was amazing. We were in these kind of hills between a couple of mountain ridges, and there was yeah, caribou. We kind of had some caribou in sight at all times. It was a lot of like lone bulls passing through, zigzagging around in there, and it was cool. To go from never seeing one to like in a couple of days trying to kind of figure these animals out and try to figure their behavior out, and figure out how to get in for a stalk, because the cover was like, maybe a foot high. There wasn't a tree or bush around, but there was enough terrain to where we could put stalks on them. And yeah, I had a really cool, I spotted this bull. It was just kind of feeding, and started putting a stalk on him. And I was crawling a lot through the water because the cover, there was just a little bit of standing water everywhere. And the cover was just, 1 to foot and a half high, maybe 2 foot in some spots. So yeah. I had to get low, a lot of like belly crawling through the water. But luckily it was mid-August and it was warm. So I was hunting in a t-shirt pretty much the whole time. But it was crazy how they were, like, one was running one way, one was running another. And we're like, what are these caribou running from? They weren't really migrating yet, but they just seemed to like to move a lot. And you'd see like a bull would stand still. I think he was like standing, sleeping up, or just resting or something, but it would stand there for maybe 2 minutes and then just take off running. That's kind of how my stalk went too. I saw this bull standing there. I snuck down a ways, came up over this little berm where I could see him, and then I started crawling in on him, and he took off running, and he went a couple hundred yards, and he stopped, and it started feeding. And so I stood up and covered a little ground standing, and then I got down again, started crawling in, and I got into within like 70 yards. Oh, he actually bedded down that time. And I got to 70 yards, and then I'm ranging his antlers. I'm thinking, okay, he's going to stand up. I'm going to get a shot. It's going to work out great. And I'm sitting there ready, and he pops up and runs. And like, there was nothing wrong with spooked him. I think it's just like a defense mechanism. They don't like to stand around too long, but I kept on him, and like 2 miles later, and he finally bedded on it was going up kind of the hill onto a mountain, and he bedded to where his whole body was exposed. So that time when I crawled into this berm, I could just it was a long shot, but I guess kind of took my time, pulled back, settled in, and just smoked him, shot him through the heart.
Nice.
And he jumped up, made it about 5 feet, staggered, and dropped right there. And oh man, that was exciting. I went over there, and man, are they a beautiful animal. They had this like dark chocolate brown, like heavy velvet antlers. It was a good bull too. It had, big tops. And their hide was also like almost like chocolate brown, but it had a silver sheen to it. And I mean, just beautiful animals, just to lay my hands on that. And those antlers and hide was just pretty cool experience all around.
What head were you using on that, Bill?
Yeah, I was using our S125 on that hunt. Yeah, that's pretty much my go-to elk and now caribou head. I feel really confident shooting that at long range, and it's really strong head. Yeah, penetrates great. It's kind of a good all-around head for me. I was using it for mule deer and whitetail and hog and everything, but now since we came with our wide, have kind of converted over to that for whitetails. And when I know the shot's gonna be a little closer, why not put a bigger hole through kind of thing. But yeah, I really like that S125 head.
Do you think a decoy would have made a little bit of a difference out in that wide open country like that?
Man, I do. And I don't think, if you know of somebody who sells a caribou decoy, like, just the head or something that's more mobile, let me know.
I talked to Predator Decoy there, the one that Aaron's uses, and I asked them if they had a caribou, and they said that they're possibly in the future going to come out with one, but for now, guys have been using their muley doe on the front of their bow and have had success with it like that. So we're doing a BC trip next year. Can maybe slide in for caribou after, and I think I'm going to bring one just to have it.
I'm planning to go back to Alaska and repeat that hunt this year. I loved it so much. I got to get back up there some more. And you know what I did? So I got mine on the second day, like the first day we could hunt, and then my buddies hunted for a couple more days. So in 3 days, we all three got good bulls with our bows. But in those 2 other days, I made that trek back a couple miles to go look for my arrow some more the next day, and I was kind of messing around with caribou. Had my bow along, and I was when I see a caribou coming, I was kind of holding my bow up to my head and like, I don't know, trying to walk around like a caribou. And I had bulls come up to me. A couple of them were small ones, but one was a decent bull, come all the way in, just kind of curious what the heck I was, to like 40 yards and walk around me. So I do feel like a decoy would work great up there.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so we don't want to keep you too long here. We're an hour and a half into this thing. And I would normally ask, what's next for Iron Will, but you're kind of just releasing a bunch of new products. So I'm sure that's kind of what's on the docket for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, nothing more this year in terms of broadheads. I'm working on, I've got a couple development projects going on right now, but it's just too early to mention them. I don't want people asking me for them yet. But we just coming out with our wide solid, our single bevel, and our Snyder Core series. I think that's a lot of new stuff we just came out with. So I think people are pretty happy with those products for a while.
Yeah, I'm very happy with your stuff. I just was pushing Wasey onto some components on some arrows he's building right now. So you got my vote anyways. So
how many times a week do you get somebody asking you to build an expandable, Bill?
Most of those guys have stopped, but maybe once a week or something, I hear it.
Okay. I figured. I don't think that you could ever make an expandable up to your standards that would work. I think it's impossible.
No, I mean, I've done enough mechanism design. I feel like I could design one that's better than what's available, but at the same time, I just don't think I just think a fixed blade is a better solution. I get a lot of requests for it, but I don't. And I mean, some guys that are, pretty serious hunters and stuff too will have little debates over it. But to me, I still don't think there's a better. If I don't see a reason why I personally would ever want to use one over the other products we make. So I'm not going to make something. I mean, I know it would sell if you made a high-end mechanical, but I'm not really interested in making something to make money that I don't believe is a good product for people to use. So
one more thing I want to ask you about, Bill, because this is a very hot topic in my group of buddies out here, is how that chisel tip broadhead could have such a high force test. The people I talk to just find it hard to believe that it's that many foot-pounds to penetrate.
Well, I mean, I tell them, go ahead and next time you get an animal down, push through it with an Iron Will broadhead, and then pick any chisel point 3-blade out there and push through it. And Aaron's done it by putting the hide or the animal on a scale and push down through and measured it that way. But you can kind of feel it by hand, like how much force it really takes to push through. And I mean, measuring on an instrument machine, it's very accurate. And I've done it repeatedly. It's real. It's like, I can't remember which one was 50 and which one was 80 pounds, but to go through the hide and the meat, the different 3-blade, like one piece cut on contact or chisel point. But it's a lot of force to push through there. And, that trocar point type tip, it wasn't really designed for low force to cut through anything. I believe that was designed initially for like to drill to make a hole down into a bone without breaking it apart, like, but not for a low force penetration. So anyway, it's, it probably varies a little among manufacturers, but in general, I mean, take a 3-blade head out there and try and push it down through a hide, or if you just shot at an animal, try to push it down into the hind quarter, just through the hide and meat, versus a really sharp 2-blade. And it's a night and day difference for force.
And in all actuality, we're talking about pretty much the same cutting diameter, as most 3-blade chisel points are, as compared to your 2-blade with a bleeder.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a chisel point is just not great for going through hide. I mean, it just takes a lot of force to push that through hide. That's what it comes down to. Cut on contact, a very sharp blade is just going to take way lower force to get started. And so you just got all that more energy retained through the hide to where it's just going to get you further through the animal.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a good spot to put a pin in it, and maybe we'll check in on you again, maybe mid-season or after the season, and see how you're doing. And Bill, we really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. And yeah, man, that was cool.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's good to I used to live in Wisconsin, and then I worked quite a bit in the Minnesota area, and your accents sound a lot like some of my old friends there. I used to go to Canada, up to Ontario, fishing quite a bit too, and on. Kind of reminds me of the old times.
Yeah, perfect. Jared from Tolkien Traditional Archery. I don't know if you know those guys, but he was like, he's always sending me memes of Bob and Doug McKenzie, and he's like, "Oh, my favorite Canadians. Good day."
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Wilderness Locals, or check out the gear at our website, www.wildernesslocals.net.